Hello guys, this is your friend. We are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto build own harem with Tsunami, Tsunade, Mikoto, Ayame, Anko, Karin, Hana, Temari, Tsume, Tsuyu, Shizune, Kin, Hinata, and Kurenai, Part 4. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start a new fanfic. Naruto was up the next morning, and he grabbed his pack and a quick breakfast to go. He doubted Jiraiya would be too keen on stopping too early, but then again he didn't know. He also grabbed Gamma, who had all of 100 Ryo inside him. Naruto walked out and heard some griping, turning to the apartment that Temari, Ayame, and Karin shared. Karin was still with Tsuyu and Kin. He doubted she would have gotten up to go sleep in her own bed. And it didn't sound like the Ayame griping. He opened the door and paused at what he saw, blinking silently. "This is so damn demeaning," Temari said, tugging at the outfit Ayame had her put on. It was basically a maid outfit, except the top was a corset style too small, and the short was entirely too small also. A good labored breath in her would pop out and a large enough gust of wind would show everyone that she hadn't been allowed to wear any form of underwear. "Deal with it, Temari-chan. Naruto-kun told me what you did to him. This is just part of your punishment," Ayame said, walking from the kitchen, and smiled seeing Naruto. "Is it to your liking, Naruto-kun?" she asked. Temari whipped around, and cursed as her popped out of the corset, and she no doubt flashed the other blonde. She grumbled as she turned back around and began to adjust herself a bit more, grumbling about Ayame and the damned outfits. She turned around slower again and pointed at the blonde. "Not one word," she growled out. Naruto smirked a bit, leaning against the door. "Nice show, but remember, Temari, you're my slave for the next 6 months. You don't want to upset me much more, do you?" he asked. He watched her pale before turning and walking out of the apartment, and out of the complex. He got his point across, and while he would enjoy getting his revenge, he didn't have enough time that morning. Naruto made it out to the village gates, noticing Jiraiya waiting for him, but surprisingly enough Kurenai and Hinata were both there as well. He jogged over and stopped by Jiraiya. "You're on time," Naruto said, looking at Jiraiya. He was so used to Kakashi's tardiness. Jiraiya rolled his eyes. "We're not all Kakashi Gaki. You ready to roll?" Jiraiya asked, crossing his arms over his chest. He had been swamped in paperwork the day before as acting Hokage, and he had felt a disturbance in the perverseness. It seemed to radiate from the blonde beside him, but he had no proof. Anyo, Naruto's attention was drawn to the shy Hyuga girl. "I heard you were going on a month-long mission N Naruto-kun. I made this for you." Hinata held out a small pack, blushing furiously. Naruto accepted the pack and smiled to Hinata. "Thanks, Hinata-chan." He scratched the back of his head, suddenly feeling really nervous. Maybe when I get back you'd like to go get something to eat. Just between friends if you want. I mean, I don't want you to think that I'm." Hinata gave a soft eep, but managed to nod. I'd like that Naruto-kun," she said, bringing her hands to her chest and holding them there. "Aw, look, Gaki, you got a girl to date," Jiraiya said, adding his 2 cents. The word date floated through Hinata's mind and she saw herself in a fancy dress, kissing Naruto, and her mind went blank as her world went dark. Naruto moved and caught Hinata as she was falling, glaring at Jiraiya now. "I have her, Naruto-san. Why don't you get going with Jiraiya-sama while I take her home to rest?" Kurenai asked, picking Hinata up and carrying her away. Naruto looked at the pack and unzipped it. He smiled a bit, seeing some rice balls as well as some medicinal cream. He may have had breakfast, but it was a small breakfast more than anything, so the 4 rice balls looked especially tasty as he ate them and walked alongside Jiraiya. "Hey Gaki, give me one of those," Jiraiya said, reaching over to grab one of the rice balls. "No," Naruto said, pulling the pack away and using his hand to keep Jiraiya away. "Hinata-chan made them for me, get your own," he said, slowly, being overpowered by Jiraiya. I'll show you a second jutsu, Jiraiya said, trying to bribe the blonde. You mean one besides the first that you were going to teach me on this trip that you haven't even shown me yet? Naruto asked in a deadpan tone. Jiraiya looked like he was about to refute something but pouted and looked away. Naruto moved the pack back in front of him, when suddenly one of the rice balls went missing. Damn it, Arrow Sennin! Naruto shouted and chased after the Gamma Sannin who was stuffing the rice ball into his mouth. Naruto quickly realized that there was a difference between his speed and Jiraiya's speed, not by much, but Jiraiya seemed to always be a full foot ahead of Naruto. Their chase lasted about an hour, putting them well on their way. Jiraiya watched the fuming blonde, almost laughing. Okay Gaki, I'm going to teach you your old man's other signature technique. Jiraiya said and formed the Rasengan in his hand, showing the blonde before he put it through a tree quite effectively. It's an A-ranked shape manipulation jutsu. It has 3 steps to it, 3 steps you have to work out on your own. Jiraiya handed Naruto a scroll and unsealed 2 water balloons from it. He handed one to the blonde who tucked the scroll into his coat pocket. Now, watch. Jiraiya used his chakra to swirl the water around in the balloon until it exploded. The first step is rotation. You have to use your chakra to pop the water balloon. Naruto held his water balloon before using his chakra to start spinning the water in the balloon. It began to warp, but it didn't pop like he thought it would. He furrowed his brow before looking to Jiraiya. Okay Arrow Sennin, you got me hooked. But, I'll make a deal with you. Shoot Gaki. Jiraiya said, crossing his arms over his chest. You take a contingent of my shadow clones to work on wind manipulation, and I'll work on this thing alone. Naruto said, holding up the balloon. Jiraiya nodded and watched as the blonde made about 200 clones. Will you have enough chakra left to work on that? Jiraiya asked. Naruto nodded and started to walk off as Jiraiya left instructions for the clones to split a leaf. The clones also had a few other things they were going to work on, such as the sand control they had. Jiraiya was quick to catch up, watching as the blonde worked on the water balloon. As they entered a town, Jiraiya's attention was brought to a woman that was flirting with him. Naruto wanted to roll his eyes as Jiraiya followed like a whipped puppy. I hope he realizes it's a genjutsu. Naruto said, walking with a higher level of alertness. He moved his hand to a storage scroll and unsealed the Kusanagi, putting it on his back for a left-handed draw. His right hand was stronger than his left, but he was going to use a little misdirection in case he was attacked. The woman went right after Jiraiya after all, so it was either meant to lure Jiraiya away to a trap, which the Sannin could survive, or lure Jiraiya away from him, which put Naruto on guard even more. Naruto checked into a hotel, like Jiraiya had told him to do. His headband ended any argument about him being too young to be checking in by himself. Naruto opened the door to the room and entered, locking the door as well. He began to concentrate on the water balloon again, trying to figure out the trick. About a half hour later, Naruto heard a knock on the door. He stood up, putting the water balloon down. He channeled chakra into his eyes, readying to mutate them to the Rinnegan at a moment's notice. He opened the door to be staring at 2 tall figures dressed in black cloaks with red clouds on them. One was blue, and had a large package on his back, the other had a pair of Sharingan eyes watching Naruto. Who are you? Naruto asked the pair, his left hand resting against the door, up by the hilt of the Kusanagi. We're with the Akatsuki Naruto-kun, and we would like for you to come with us peacefully. The Sharingan user said, his tone flat as he spoke. Naruto looked them over. Let's see here. Scratched out Kiri headband, big sword, sharp teeth. The blue one grinned at Naruto, noticing a few things. Either you killed a member of the 7 Swordsmen of Mist, and you're acting like said person, or you are a member of the 7 Swordsmen of Mist. The blue man grinned more broadly. Second one, huh? Naruto turned to the Sharingan user. Let's see. Scratched out Konoha headband, Sharingan eyes, you look sort of like Sasuke Itachi Uchiha. The Sharingan user nodded. Well, Naruto sighed a bit, hanging his head and letting his eyes go to the Rinnegan. His right hand snapped up. Shinra Tensei, he shouted, blasting the two away from the doorway and pushing them through the wall. Naruto then turned around and ran to the far window, jumping through and bringing his arms and legs up to crash through, and rolled as he landed. He then took off running, not wanting to fight in the confines of the city. Naruto's danger senses went off and he drew the Kusanagi, spinning as a heavily wrapped sword hit the ground where he was before. Naruto held his left hand out in front of him, holding the Kusanagi, his right hand opened and ready to do something. Oh, so the Gaki thinks he's a swordsman. The blue man said, I'm Kisame Hoshigaki. I heard what happened with Zabuza. But you had help with that one, didn't you? Kisame swung the bandaged sword and Naruto brought up the Kusanagi to block before moving it, going for a palm thrust at Kisame's chest. Naruto was forced to dodge as Kisame went for a spin kick. Naruto blocked another strike from Kisame's swords, noticing that same insane strength that Zabuza had. No, if anything, Kisame was stronger. Naruto pulled a Hiroshin kunai from his pouch and channeled wind chakra into it. He then slung it at Kisame's face, noticing the swordsman dodged to the side to avoid it. The wind chakra kept the kunai going until it struck a building over by the town. Bye. Naruto called out cheerfully and disappeared in a yellow flash just as he was about to be struck with Kisame's sword. Itachi's eyes widened slightly, before going back to normal. He then glanced over at Kisame and cast a genjutsu over him before creating a shadow clone. The clone headed off to find Naruto. Come Kisame, we must report back to Leader Sama of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki's abilities. It wasn't known that he could use the Rinnegan. Kisame scoffed, but put Sametaha up on his back once more. I was hoping to shave a leg or arm off. The Gaki needs to be brought down soon though, or else I don't think even Leader Sama will be able to take him. The two then walked off, Itachi glancing back briefly. So the fourth's legacy really is his legacy. Naruto had picked up the Hiroshin kunai and kept running, moving to head into a crowd of people. As he landed, however, he was spun around and face to face with Itachi. Naruto was quick to realize it was a shadow clone and took a swipe with the Hiroshin kunai, which was blocked. Wait, Naruto-kun, Itachi said, backing away a bit, leaving Naruto to look on at Itachi suspiciously. I wish only to inquire how my little brother is doing, as well as my mother. She would be the only one to have given you my old Anbu uniform. Itachi had immediately recognized it. Why wouldn't he, considering he had worn it at Naruto's age? Naruto watched Itachi for a little bit. Why would you care? You killed off your clan. Itachi closed his eyes. Think of it as a regret I have had, one that will not be washed away no matter how much I wish to have it washed away. Naruto bit his tongue, thinking. Sasuke is doing fine. He has a bit of a stick up his. He's injured, and he's a little on the cold side, but he's been doing pretty well. Unlocked his Sharingan and currently has 2 Tomo in each eye. Mikoto is doing well. She seemed pleased last time I saw her. Naruto purposely neglected to mention that Mikoto was pleasured last time Naruto saw her, so she was indeed pleased. Itachi nodded, pleased with what Naruto told him. Then I have one last bit to say. The clone pushed Naruto against the wall again. If you break my mother's heart, Naruto, then there is no force in heaven or on earth that will save you from my wrath. I will hunt you down and hurt you, even at the cost of my eyes. Am I understood? Naruto gave a nod. Understood, Naruto said simply and briefly. He was then let go, but before the clone popped, he had to ask. Why'd you spare Mikoto-chan? Naruto asked. Itachi knew, somehow, so it was only fair Naruto got to use the chan suffix. Itachi looked back to Naruto. I was hoping that my mother would help keep Sasuke stable in his pursuit of power so that he could one day kill me. I look forward to the day that he challenges me, Naruto-kun. With that, Itachi's clone popped. Naruto ran a hand through his blonde hair before heading out of the alley and going to look for Jiraiya. It wasn't hard to find the Sannin who was running across the rooftops. Naruto whistled, getting Jiraiya's attention. Naruto climbed up to meet the man and saw the woman who had been under the genjutsu. "So, Akatsuki?" Naruto asked, crossing his arms. Jiraiya looked to the blonde. "Did you see who they sent after you? So you do know about them. I'm going to assume you were going to tell me, and train me, another time." "They sent Kisame Hoshigaki and Itachi Uchiha," Naruto said, looking to the unconscious woman. "Which explains why they used a distraction." Jiraiya cursed, hearing those two names. The tailed beast without a tail, and the man behind the Uchiha clan massacre. Damn Gaki, you sure got shitty luck. Somehow, Naruto didn't think even if he could revamp his stats with everything going to pure luck that he'd get much better. It's a group of S-class missing nin who are after the Biju, purpose and reason unknown. Orochimaru had been part of a group, which got my attention. He defected for unknown reasons. Naruto's hypothesis was indeed correct. "How'd you get away?" Jiraiya asked. "Used the Rinnegan, then ran. When they caught up, I threw a wind-enhanced Hirishin Kunai, and teleported." Naruto shook his head. "Come on, Ero Sennin, let's get this woman to where someone can find her, and then get the hell out of here." Naruto moved to help the woman and take her down to the streets. He was able to sneak past the civilians no problem, and put the woman on a bench before sneaking away. Naruto got back to Jiraiya before he seized up. He fell forward unconscious as the information from all his clones hit him at once. Jiraiya caught the blonde, shaking his head for a bit before carrying Naruto away towards the next town. Several days later, they made it to the next town, where a festival was going on. Jiraiya left Naruto to his own devices, choosing to go gather some research and try and find a direction on Tsunade. Naruto stayed outside of the town to train the Rasengan. He was still working on the first step, flipping the water balloon between both hands, not really paying attention as he was thinking. He was caught by surprise when it exploded in his face. Naruto looked at his hands and then around him, making sure no one did that. He then used the water to form a small platform of ice on the ground, making it completely smooth as a baby's bear. He took another water balloon and began to roll it on the ice, back and forth, trying to figure out the secret to what got the water balloon to pop the first time. He was pleasant surprised when it popped. He cleared the water and balloon bits off the ice and took another out, passing it between his hands a little slower. The water is moving in different directions, spinning at several velocities and going clockwise and counterclockwise at the same time. Naruto said to himself. He took the balloon and focused his chakra to his hand, spinning it around and making it explode. He grinned and did it twice more to make sure it wasn't a fluke. Satisfied he was done with the first step of the Rasengan, Naruto stood up and walked into the town, the grin being unable to be swiped off his face. He then saw a casino. Find Jiraiya, or possibly earn more money. Naruto had never lost a game of chance, ever. His luck still, considering the fact he had a 9-tailed demon stuck in his gut when he was born. His first C-ranked mission had an A-ranked missing nin, and a whole slew of other bullshit that he wasn't going into. Naruto turned to the casino and headed on in. He traded half his money in for a small bit of chips, and headed straight for the blackjack tables. 2 hours later, he was asked to leave the casino, a considerably richer man with a very fat and happy-looking Gama-chan. The rest of the money had to be stored in storage seals. Now it was time to find Jiraiya. Naruto began to look around for seedier places. When he was tried to be stopped, he tapped his headband and explained he was looking for his sensei. He eventually found Jiraiya at a brothel, with 2 women on either side of his body. He turned to the bouncer, and paid the man a good bit of money to not interfere. Naruto then tucked his headband away, and headed over to Jiraiya. "Ji-san, there you are. And you're not itching your privates. I guess the cream 2-san gave you for the red bumps has been working." Naruto wanted to laugh, but refrained from it as the women couldn't get away from Jiraiya fast enough. Jiraiya glared at Naruto, his eyebrow twitching violently. I hate you right now, Gaki. I really, really hate you. Naruto shrugged. I haven't pulled an awesome prank like that in a very long time. It was so simple, and there's nothing you can do about it. Come on, Arrow Sennin, Naruto said and turned to walk away, leaving Jiraiya to sigh in defeat and follow. Once outside, Naruto held his hand out in front of Jiraiya with a water balloon and popped it with his chakra. Next step please, Naruto said. Jiraiya unsealed a scroll and from it unsealed 2 rubber balls. He then passed one to Naruto, and proceeded to pop his own. Power is the next step, kid. You got rotation down, now you need the power. Naruto accepted the scroll of rubber balls and began to work on the power. He'd get the rubber ball to deform, before a hole appeared in it. Son of a bitch, Naruto said as he kept working on it. He needed to get the power down. A week later and Naruto was still diligently working on it and had healing chakra burns on both hands. Jiraiya was out doing his own thing, leaving Naruto to watch over the hotel room. Naruto was bored, but he couldn't keep working on the Rasengan or else he'd hurt his hands more. Naruto grabbed a rubber ball. Let's try it one last time, he said. He grabbed a kunai from his pouch and poked a small wound into the palm of his hand, wincing a bit. He put the ball right on top and grabbed his right arm at the wrist with his left hand. He began to focus his chakra through his arms to that spot, rotating the air inside the rubber ball as fast as he could and in as many different directions as he could. He closed his eyes in concentration and was beamed in the head with a piece of rubber. Naruto opened his eyes, and saw that the rubber ball had exploded, violently exploded. It was all over the room. Naruto grinned and pumped his fist at his success and then began to blow on his aching hand. Now Naruto was even more bored. He didn't want to push his success and hurt his hands more, but he didn't want to think his success was a fluke. I'll start on it again tomorrow, he told himself and moved to sit for meditation. Jiraiya had wanted the blonde to start meditating, it was to get Naruto ready for something else. Naruto began to do the breathing exercises to relax his muscles and his mind. It wasn't something Naruto would think he'd enjoy, but surprisingly he found it relaxing. He just couldn't go that deep into it usually. Still, Naruto relaxed his entire being, mind and body working as one. Naruto heard a steady dripping and opened his eyes to find himself in a sewer. Okay, that's weird, Naruto said and stood up, beginning to follow the pipes around the corridors. This way, a voice whispered, echoing along the metal and concrete. Naruto took off in a dead sprint, this way, a sharp left, a right, this way. Naruto was navigating what seemed like a maze. Almost there, Naruto came to a halt in a large room, with a set of golden bars on one wall. In the middle of the bars, there was a piece of paper with the kanji for seal on it. The Kyuubi no Yoko, Naruto said, knowing instantly where he was. He saw the flash of crimson eyes behind the bars and began to walk forward, stopping about 10 feet away. Brave of you, brave, but foolish. A set of claws launched out between the bars, stopping just before they could impale Naruto, who didn't even flinch. Enough of the posturing, Kyuubi, why am I here? Naruto asked, crossing his arms over his chest as he watched the claw retract. Kyuubi snarled a bit, an orange glow showing the form of the giant fox with 9 swishing tails. You think I will fall to your whims like the others? Never. I will not fall for the trap your little game has given you. I have seen you, watched you with other women, even with my sister, but I will not fall prey to you. Naruto watched Kyuubi for a while. You could be freed. He realized how badly that sounded, like he was trying to buy her off for. Sorry, that came out wrong. Kyuubi snarled a bit more, slamming her claw against the cage, surprisingly rattling it, but it held strong. I will not be a slave to your whims. I tried to sway my sister, but she was too weak to be swayed. You pathetic creatures disgust me. Even now I feel your influence, your aura, and your animal magnetism. Stupid things, but I will not fall prey to them. I am the ultimate of the Biju, I will defy you. Naruto listened to the Kyuubi's vehemence. I don't want a slave Kyuubi. I don't even want to force myself on anyone. He said honestly. Honeyed words to get me to believe your lies. You forget, I also saw you take the lying skill, and put it high enough to be considered an expert in it. Kyuubi snarled. Lies that work on humans Kyuubi, not Biju. You're also more alert to it, having seen me get it. I wouldn't be able to lie to you, even if it was at the max. Naruto said and watched Kyuubi for a while. Naruto took a step forward. I didn't want you Kyuubi, I would rather see you free than forced onto someone. What happened the night you attacked? Kyuubi watched the bold blonde for a while. He rarely consciously called upon her power. The only times that he had used her power was when she was trying to influence him. She had to give him a begrudging amount of respect. Kyuubi let out a sigh before in a burst of fire, she was in her human form. Long silky red hair that was pulled into a braid that went down her front, orange eyes that stared into the blonde's form, she also had a body that any woman would kill for. Large firm, that were bigger than any he had ever seen, stood high on her chest, wide flared hips, and her long legs gave her height over the blonde. She was as tall as Jiraiya. Her full lips were pursed, like she had on a. She also had a small beauty mark at the left side of her lips. Her face was well defined, with high cheekbones and just a regal look to her. Her 9 flowing tails swished behind her, about 4 feet in length each. She was dressed in red and black kimono that would leave even the richest daimyo's wife jealous. Naruto looked surprised to see the Kyuubi take her human form and had to turn his head away, his hand at his nose to try and stop the nosebleed. It wasn't working so well. The blonde managed to get it to stop, and wipe the blood away. Sorry about that, he said looking back to the Kyuubi. I'm good now. He said. Clearly. Be honored Naruto Uzumaki, you are the only human to have ever seen my human form. She said, her black-tipped fox ears twitching a little on the top of her head, the only indication she was upset, not that the blonde knew that. The night of your birth, I was freed from your mother and placed under a powerful genjutsu to attack Konoha. If you want to know more, you will have to impress me. Naruto scratched his head a bit. I'll start learning a bit more about my mind from the Yamanaka clan when we get back to Konoha. I'll see if I can't fix up my mindscape a bit, see about giving you some luxury. Naruto said. The Kyuubi's lips slowly drew into a slight smirk. Thank you Naruto, she said. She had to know something though. If Ikibi was to ever wish to leave you, would you let her go? Naruto looked over at the beauty that was the Kyuubi and gave a nod. I won't hold anyone against their will, it would be wrong of me to do so. Kyuubi rolled the words around on her tongue, listening for a lie. There was none to be had. You continue to impress me Naruto Uzumaki, you are a strange human. Perhaps, just perhaps, there is a desirable quality to your personality. She motioned him over with one finger. When he stood just beyond the bars, she reached through, cupping his groin. But let me make this understood, she squeezed it rather tightly getting a hiss of pain from the blonde. If we ever have, and I want to leave, you had best just let me go or you will be in far more pain. She released her grip and turned snapping her fingers as she walked away, her hips sashaying like nothing else. I had blocked your healing abilities when you entered the game, they've been unblocked now. Naruto was jolted out of his mind, and looked up to a worried-looking Jiraiya. Did you speak with the Kyuubi? Jiraiya asked seriously. Naruto stood up. Yeah, I did. He said and stretched himself a bit, but felt his wounds healing faster. He looked at his hands that were no longer suffering from the chakra burns. He grabbed a rubber ball and put it in the palm of his hand and grabbed his right wrist. A moment later, he popped the ball. Said she unblocked my healing abilities, threatened the destruction of my soul, The usual stuff regarding a massive engine of pure violence. Jiraiya watched the blonde pop the ball and listened to what the Kyuubi had said. It was surprising and yet at the same time not so surprising that Biju was a female. Just be careful, okay? Jiraiya asked. Naruto looked over to Jiraiya. Sure, I'll be careful. I promise, he said and held his hand out, this time trying with one hand. It took a bit longer, but he got the ball to pop with just one hand. Next step please, Naruto said, looking to Jiraiya. Jiraiya grumbled about how fast the blonde was getting the steps down and took out a bunch of balloons filled with just air. Now you combine the two steps, and form a protective shell around it. That's what you're going to do, and make sure you don't pop the balloon. He then handed the blonde a scroll full of balloons. Naruto nodded and sat down to start working on it, watching Jiraiya write some stuff down in a notebook. He wondered briefly what the man was doing, but respectfully stood up and went outside to practice. It took Naruto about another 4 days to finish that task, and yet they weren't closer to finding Tsunade. Still, Naruto thought he'd surprise Jiraiya by acting like he was having difficulty with the Rasengan. When they stopped, Naruto would wander off and start working on putting wind chakra into it. He was starting to have problems with his hands though, slight problems feeling something or he would get random tingles. Despite his healing factor back in full force, Naruto was still having problems with his hand and he couldn't heal it himself using medical jutsu because he didn't have the skill yet, and he didn't know one-handed medical jutsu. He didn't want to worry Jiraiya, so he stayed quiet about it. They soon entered a small bar for a bite to eat when Jiraiya stopped. Well, he shook his head having a grin. Tsunade Heim, he called out, waving as he walked over towards the blonde woman. Naruto paused, looking at the famed medic who was drinking sake pretty heavily. He moved over, and sat on the outside of the side Jiraiya had picked. Jiraiya, you old pervert, Tsunade shook her head. What are you doing here? She asked. Oh, you know me, wandering around, doing checks on my network, I can't just stop for a drink and run into my old teammate. Jiraiya asked, still grinning a bit. Naruto rolled his eyes and ordered some food. He was hungry, damn it. Who's the Gaki? Don't tell me you took on another apprentice. He looks even more pathetic than the last one, at least that Minato kid turned out okay. Still was a damned fool in the end though. Tsunade said, taking a drink of her sake. Naruto closed his right hand into a fist, wanting to hit the woman for calling his father a fool. But he wouldn't, not yet. Jiraiya had explained that Tsunade was a bit of a bitter woman. It seemed to Naruto that she just needed her pipes cleaned. This is my new apprentice, and he's got a lot of potential. He just needs to learn respect for his betters. Jiraiya proclaimed. Naruto looked over at Jiraiya. Ero Sennin, I surpassed you in the sealing arts. I'm technically your better in said arts. He said, making Jiraiya grumble a bit about no respecting Uzumaki brats. Naruto glanced over to Tsunade. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, he said. Tsunade snorted. I don't really care, Gaki. She said. Of course she knew the name Uzumaki, it had been her grandmother's maiden name. Can't believe a second-old friend showed up. By that you mean? Jiraiya prompted, looking to Tsunade. Orochimaru. Tsunade confirmed. He bragged about killing Sensei, seems pissed though because he lost something. He seemed particularly upset about the scars on his face, says he got them during his fight with Sensei. Naruto elbowed Jiraiya in the ribs. Told you he wouldn't admit to it, pay up. Jiraiya grumbled a bit and paid with a large black book. That should make you happy, Gaki, only 100 of my famous XXX black Ika in existence. It's worth a small fortune. Naruto looked at the book and then at Jiraiya. He tossed the book over to Tsunade. That should cover your debts for a while. Now pay up on the agreed upon price, Ero Sennin. Tsunade growled and pushed the book to the side, not noticing Shizune grab it and glance at the inside before blushing heavily and putting the book away. Admit to what? You know something, Gaki? she asked. Naruto nodded. I, the lonely genin that I am, tore out a chunk of Orochimaru's soul and caused those scars along his face. I can't take credit for the arms though, Ji-san got those. He said as he got paid the proper amount of money. He mentally smirked seeing the black-haired woman's blushing face. It seemed there was another pervert at the table. He then looked over to Jiraiya, who also didn't seem to notice the woman's actions. Now tell her, or I will. Jiraiya looked to Tsunade. You, Tsunade Senju, have been selected to become the Godime Hokage of the great village of Konoha. Tsunade snorted and shook her head. Hell no, that job is only for a bunch of damned fools. Sensei was lucky. It's a fool's dream for those that want to die young. Naruto clenched his hand tighter, and grit his teeth. Even your own student, Minato, that Gaki died young for that fool's job. Naruto stood up, slamming his fist into the table. Then it's a fool's job I strive for. He snapped at Tsunade. But don't you dare belittle those great men. He looked her down and then up. You're nothing more than a pathetic washout of a woman that's afraid to try and fill her granddaddy's boots. It is the duty of the younger generation to surpass the older generation, yet all I see before me is an arrogant and scared woman, a woman that would fail to live up to those that came before her. Tsunade watched Naruto. That sounds like some fighting words, Gaki. If they are, you might want to reconsider. I have no problem beating the hell out of you. Naruto glanced over his shoulder. Outside looks fun, he said, his anger still digging its spurs into him over what she was saying. Tsunade stood up, and finished her sake before walking out, with Naruto following behind her. Once outside, she walked down the street a bit and turned around looking at the blonde. I won't even need more than one finger to win Gaki. Naruto reached up and removed his headband, tucking it away. He didn't want it to get damaged by her super strength. He then cracked his knuckles a bit, watching Tsunade. I'll make you eat your words, he said before rushing ahead, a little unused to his newfound speed, but that wasn't going to be a problem. He weaved around her finger thrusts, using what he knew from the snake style about dodging so far. He went for a punch with his right hand, which she blocked. He winced at the contact. It was only a sharp stabbing pain. He leaned back, catching her finger thrust in his right hand, noticing her eyes narrow as he gave a second wince. Naruto threw her hand away and moved for a sweep kick, but she leapt up over it, and drove her finger down into the ground, throwing him off balance. She moved to flick him in the forehead. He brought his right hand up to block and took the full brunt of the strength, sliding back some. In his left hand, however, Naruto had her obi. But his hand was in pain and the look on his face showed it. Naruto tried to close his right hand into a fist, but the pain was sharp and it hurt like hell, a fact that showed on his face. Shizune. Tsunade barked out, stomping over to the blonde and yanking her obi from his hand. She quickly tied it around her waist, a little impressed by the blonde Gaki. Had he been using a kunai, she would have a kunai plunged in her stomach. She also cursed her Hippocratic oath she swore as a medic. Shizune had already grabbed the blonde's right arm and was holding it out. She began to touch, and prod and scan it with medical jutsu. What the hell have you been doing, Gaki? She noticed Jiraiya looking worried. Naruto tugged his arm away before looking to both the Sannin and the black-haired woman, Shizune. He heard her be called, and sighed. He held out his hand palm up and formed the Rasengan. The Rasengan, an A-ranked close-ranged offensive ninjutsu based purely on shape manipulation. Naruto said. You taught him the Rasengan? Tsunade asked, looking angrily at Jiraiya. You never told me you finished it. Jiraiya said, crossing his arms and looking a bit surprised at Naruto. Naruto closed his eyes. And this, he began to concentrate, focusing his chakra like when his clones sliced the leaves. Sharp, to the point, something that he believed could cut through everything because that was his wind chakra. It began to adjust in the Rasengan, but the shell began to waver. Naruto kept concentrating, even as 4 small blades, looking like a shuriken, was in the middle of the Rasengan and spinning around. They wavered, alongside the shell as he tried to focus it, to try and keep it from discharging. This is what I've been working on, adding my element into the Rasengan. Just then, it exploded, making Naruto scream out in agony as the blades tore into his hand. Stubbornly, Naruto moved to keep Tsunade from doing anything. He used some of Hinata's cream that numbed the pain. He then pulled out a roll of bandages and quickly wound them around his hand, using his teeth to pull and tighten them. Tsunade watched Naruto bandage himself up, a small amount of respect on her face. She took the hand and began to accelerate the healing, frowning as she realized the wind blades cut down on the cellular level. "Who taught you how to make the cream and wrap the bandages?" she asked. It was a good job. Even the cream was high-quality stuff, like the stuff she made before she learned more advanced medical jutsu. "I can't take credit for the cream. Hinata-chan made it for me, but the bandages were self-taught," he said and flexed his hand, balling it into a fist. He'd give a begrudging amount of respect to Tsunade, who fixed his hand up better. Tsunade put her hands on her hips. "How about a bet, Gaki?" Tsunade asked. "You haven't finished whatever you're doing. If you can finish it in a week, I'll agree that the job of a Hokage isn't a fool's errand. I'll even throw in my necklace," she said, tugging on it a bit. "But if you can't finish it in a week, well, you take the old pervert back to Konoha and find someone else to do the job. You also can't get any help from Jiraiya over the week." Naruto walked past her. "Sure. Fine, whatever," he said. He could get his Rasengan variant down in a week, he just needed the time to focus. It would come to him, it always did. He flexed his right hand, he was glad the pain was mostly gone. Naruto went to the hotel room that he and Jiraiya had gotten as he thought about the Rasengan. It was like he couldn't keep the shell stabilized and add the wind element with one hand. He would try 2 hands tomorrow. With that he went to sleep. The next day, Naruto was working on the Rasengan. It turned out that using his other hand, he could keep the shell stabilized, but he couldn't keep adding the wind element, his focus ended up being split. He bit his lip as he sat on the ground outside the town, thinking about the attack. How could he split his focus without losing his concentration? Shizune watched the blonde from a bit of a distance away, biting her lip. The night before, she had ended up reading a chapter of Jiraiya's book, and given the fact it had full-color illustrations, it proved to be quite the night. She rubbed her thighs together a bit as she watched the blonde. Shizune had a crush on Minato when she had been younger. She was about 7 years younger than he had been at the time. Still, she had heard all about his exploits and how he eventually became Hokage. When she found out he had fallen for Kushina, she was a little crushed, but just acknowledged that she hadn't been able to win Minato's heart. The fact Jiraiya's main character bore a very striking resemblance to Minato had only gotten her hotter the night before when she acted on her own urges. Even now, she was licking her suddenly dry lips and breathing a little heavier. She watched as Naruto removed the jacket he was wearing, as well as the mesh armored shirt, and she swallowed a bit, watching as sweat slid down his back. It wasn't hard to piece together the facts, Kushina's last name but Minato's looks, Kami, she was acting so dirty, lusting after their son. Her mind went back to the book's entry, remembering how the hero of the tale began to kiss his way down the heroine's body, towards the junction between her legs. Shizune curled her toes in her heeled sandals, thinking of how the blonde's tongue would feel against her body, his hands massaging her thighs as he tasted her. Kami, she had originally come out here to try and talk the blonde out of the bet, but watching him practice, showing a superior stamina most jonin didn't have, nonetheless the civilians she had been around for years. She began to walk over to him, licking her lips over and over. She needed him to be her first. Shizune began to cross the field over to the blonde, her heart beating faster and harder with every step taken. She seized the blonde and turned him around, barely registering his look of surprise before she kissed him, clumsily licking around his lower lip and tasting him. She was delighted as he began to kiss her back. Naruto had no idea what the hell was going on, or why Shizune was kissing him, but he wasn't about to pass it up. She was sweet, and tasted very good. His hands moved and held her hips as he kissed her a little more vigorously, a little more dominantly, getting her to relax a bit and melt into the kiss some more. They kissed for a good few minutes before they pulled back for air. "I need you, Naruto-kun, please," Shizune whispered to the blonde, her hands still on his shoulders as she looked a little more hesitantly, a little worried at being rejected. She was strong, but it was a moment of weakness for her, and she didn't want to be rejected. Naruto searched Shizune's eyes and nodded. "Okay," he whispered and kissed her. "But not here, a hotel room," he said, getting Shizune to nod, her eyes lighting up like something else. It made him feel good that she apparently needed him so much that his words made her feel better. "You'll be my first, will that bother you?" Shizune asked, trying to push the worried feeling away as she led the blonde away, back towards the town. The blonde had already said okay, and he seemed to understand it was more of a tender moment. Naruto shook his head. "I'll be gentle, Shizune-chan, don't worry," he told her, following her to the hotel room. Tsunade and Shizune had a different hotel, with Shizune taking a separate room from her mentor. Naruto watched as Shizune closed and locked the door, licking her lips as she began to undo the kimono she wore. Shizune moved over to the blonde, and took his hands, leading them to the edges of her black kimono. She shivered some, watching as he carefully removed it from her body, and eased it off her shoulders. She shivered more as she felt the blonde kiss her shoulders through the supportive mesh top she wore. It only came underneath her and down like a short-sleeved t-shirt, she hadn't needed much more. Naruto pulled away from Shizune and unzipped his own jacket, tossing it to the side and quickly removing his mesh undershirt. He turned Shizune around, and ran his hands along her stomach as he kissed at her shoulders. She had a sort of girl next door quality to her that he liked. His hands came to the skirt of the kimono and began to push it down, leaving Shizune in her black underwear and the mesh top. His hands came back up and cupped her, getting her to let out a small hiss of pleasure in her back to arch. Shizune felt Naruto's hands on the mesh top, rubbing at her and she had never developed as fully as someone like Tsunade, but she was rather proud of her own. The way the blonde's hands squeezed and rubbed, it felt like he was rather happy with the size as well. "Please, Naruto-kun, quit teasing me," she said softly. Naruto kissed Shizune's neck one last time before moving around to in front of her and removing the mesh shirt off her body, depositing it with the rest of her clothes. He gently pushed her back onto the bed and knelt down between her legs. He noticed Shizune's breath hitch, and as he removed the underwear, he could see she was rather wet as well. Shizune instinctively wanted to hide herself, but the blonde didn't seem to care about the fact she was wet. She began to breathe more heavily as she watched him lean in, laying gentle kisses along her thigh. Her eyes fluttered closed as she felt him lick along her. And she bit her knuckle to keep from making too much noise. Naruto looked up at Shizune as she bit her knuckle to keep from making too much noise. That wouldn't do. Naruto slid his hands up under Shizune's body, squeezing her as he pressed his tongue into her, tasting her. He liked her taste. It was sweet with a hint of tartness to it. Still, when he felt one hand press against the back of his head, he had a sense of accomplishment as he heard Shizune let out a soft moan. She wouldn't be a screamer, but that was fine. Shizune bucked her hips up a little bit, feeling the blonde tongue her more, deeper, his fingers rubbing circles against her. Her breathing was getting faster as she ran her hand through his spiky blonde locks, her other hand was rubbing her. Already it was feeling better than any of the times she had masturbated. Naruto listened to Shizune's softer moans and he pulled back from her. He pushed a finger into her, getting her to moan a little louder as he began to lick her, getting her hips to buck a little more. He was going to show Shizune what heaven looked like and wanted to give her the best orgasm he could. Shizune began to pant a little bit, feeling the blonde lick at her. She grabbed his hair a little tighter, her hips rising up to grind against his finger in his mouth. Her orgasm began to build and tighten deep in her abdomen. Her breath was coming shorter, and yet she couldn't help but welcome the feeling, knowing what was going on. Naruto looked up to Shizune, who was just moments away from her orgasm. He removed his finger from inside her and moved his mouth back to her, licking inside her and pressing his tongue into her more. He felt her body tense, and heard her loud moan of pleasure as she came, soaking his tongue and chin with her juices. She produced quite a bit of juices for him. Naruto moved back, and wiped his mouth a bit, looking to Shizune. Tasty. Shizune blushed at the blonde's words a bit. How could she not? But she was also ready, and knew she'd feel a bit of pain from it being her first time. She swallowed a bit and watched Naruto. Please, Naruto-kun, I'm ready, she said, spreading her legs a little bit. Naruto nodded at Shizune's words and stood up. Naruto removed his pants and boxers before he grabbed his length and began to rub himself against her wet, looking down before looking up to her dark eyes. She gave him a nod and he began to press in, watching as she winced a bit but also moaned at the same time. Naruto leaned over her and held himself still, letting her get used to the size. Shizune hadn't expected the blonde to be so big. She gasped and winced at first, but soon the pain began to fade as the blonde stayed inside her and stayed still for her benefit. She wrapped her legs around his waist and began to roll her hips a bit, clumsily as she tried something she had never done before. Naruto leaned in and kissed Shizune as he began to work in and out of her, getting the hint as he felt her hands wrap around his neck and shoulders. She was tight, but at the same time very wet. Naruto ran one hand down along Shizune's sides briefly before he dipped his head down and began to on her, getting her to moan a bit more. Shizune gently ran her nails down the blonde's back, the other hand pressing his face against her more. She began to moan more as she felt the blonde's pace begin to pick up. It was great, greater than anything she could have ever dreamed of. More please Naruto-kun, more, she whispered to the blonde. Naruto heard Shizune's call for more and gave a nod, kissing her lips as he began to go a little faster and harder. His balls began to tighten, his orgasm close at hand, and given how her inner muscles began to spasm around him, he would say that her own orgasm was close as well. He held his hand on her hip a bit, thrusting a little faster. Shizune pulled from the kiss, panting as her back arched a bit, rolling her hips a bit more. "Oh Kami," she said in a loud moan as she came, feeling the blonde shoot his cum into her, feeling the hot fluid fill her up. Her body bucked against him as she panted, trying to catch her breath. Naruto moved away from Shizune and looked down to the beautiful black-haired woman. "Are you up for another round?" he asked, gently rubbing her sides. Shizune swallowed a bit and nodded to the blonde, feeling him pull out. She was slightly confused until he helped position her on her hands and knees. She looked over her shoulder at him, watching as he grabbed her hips. She nodded and her back arched as he pushed in, giving her that full feeling once more. Naruto held Shizune's hips as he began to work in and out of her. He ran his hands along her back, up her fair skin to her black hair. He pulled on her hair, getting Shizune to arch more and moan louder. Naruto began to move his hips faster in and out of Shizune, getting her to moan louder, and her breath to pick up. She clenched her hands in the sheets, and Naruto rubbed her legs and hips a bit. Shizune began to use her arms to press her hips back, moaning as she felt the blonde so deep inside of her body. She felt his hand move from her hair to her shoulder, and she took that hand in her own hand. She cupped her and held his hand there, moaning a little louder as she felt him squeeze. The change of position was feeling great to her, and sweat began to roll down from her forehead. It was more physically exhausting than she was expecting, truth be told. Naruto enjoyed the feel of Shizune's, his hand squeezed it a bit tighter, feeling her creamy skin a bit more. Naruto raised her up, still thrusting into her body, but now her back was against his chest. He leaned over her shoulder and they began to kiss again, Naruto's tongue slipping into her mouth, exploring her as he thrust a little faster, giving slight grunts. Shizune wondered who the blonde had learned from so she could thank the woman, but it seemed like the blonde knew her body so well. His hand moved along her stomach, making her inner muscles flutter a bit and her back arched as he began to rub her while his pace increased. Yes, yes, so close Naruto-kun, so close, she said, pulling her lips from the blonde's. Naruto was close himself. It wasn't hard to be given how tight Shizune was. Let's go together then, Shizune-chan, Naruto said, increasing his pace a bit more. He got her breathing to hitch again, and her back arched. Naruto threw his head back as they came at the same time, Shizune calling out his name as he filled her for a second time. Shizune laid forward, and felt the blonde pull out. She grabbed the blanket and wrapped herself up a bit, laying on her side as she watched the blonde stand completely comfortable with his. Will this be a one-time thing, Naruto-kun? She asked, still panting a bit. Naruto scratched the back of his head. If you want, yes, he said honestly. But if you want to proceed with a relationship, I do have other lovers back in Konoha, each who have a special place in my heart, he said, watching Shizune. Shizune heard the blonde's words and looked up to him. Okay. She smiled a bit. We'll try to make it work. A hodgepodge of personalities that will be family, huh? She asked, smiling a bit at Naruto's sheepish grin. That's how I see it. A big extended family, Naruto said and looked at the time. Well, I best get out of here before Tsunade gets back, he said and quickly got dressed. He didn't want to be killed because he deflowered her apprentice. Shizune nodded. I'll see you tomorrow, Naruto-kun. Right now I just want to bask in the afterglow. Naruto chuckled a bit as he headed to the window. Careful, you might make flowers bloom, he told her as he leapt out the window and headed towards his own hotel, which he was sharing with Jiraiya. As he entered the room, he grabbed the game book and tucked it away as Jiraiya looked up from his work. Jiraiya sniffed the air a bit. I smell pride and victory. Do anything special, Gaki? Naruto shook his head. Nope, but I think I made a breakthrough on my jutsu, he said before heading out. He didn't need Jiraiya getting nosy. Naruto found a nice secluded place and flipped open the book. Congratulations. You had with Shizune plus 1,400 points, plus 10 poison making, plus 10 medical jutsu, plus 10 throwing weapons. Congratulations. You received the bronze deflowerer medal plus 1,200 points. Congratulations. You received the bronze beautiful black-haired babes medal plus 1,000 points. Congratulations. You received the bronze leaf hunter medal plus 1,000 points. Congratulations. You received the bronze danger close medal plus 600 points. Naruto banked the level up, noticing he had quite a few medals from that, all of them new. Naruto headed for the medals and tapped the deflowerer medal. Deflowerer. Bronze. Take the virginity of 3 virgins. Next was the beautiful black-haired babes. Beautiful black-haired babes. Bronze. Have with 4 women that have black hair. Naruto tapped the leaf hunter. Leaf hunter. Bronze. Have with 5 kunoichi that hold allegiance to Konoha. Naruto quickly counted and nodded. He tapped the danger close medal. Danger close. Bronze. Have with a woman that has someone that will cause bodily harm to you for doing so. Naruto winced, realizing he'd have to lie his off, or have Shizune helped him with Tsunade. Naruto headed over to his stats. He had 20. 8 from the level up, 10 from getting to level 30, and 2 from back when he bumped his luck up. He had never bothered to use the 2. Naruto put 10 right into his speed, bringing it up to 70. Chakra control was brought up to 75, and then chakra levels were brought up to 70. He then headed over to the skills. He had 80 points to play with. Haggling he brought up to 100, and aura he brought up to 200. It suddenly gave him 2 options. Directive aura or encompassing aura. Naruto tapped the directive. You are able to focus your aura onto one person, making them feel an additional 20 points from your aura. He tapped the encompassing. Your aura flows out of you over a wider range, making women hornier in general rather than in just your presence. Naruto leaned back against the tree he was sitting in, and chose the directive, a scroll popping out for him to learn how to do it. He wouldn't use it unless he wanted to practically get raped, but whatever, he didn't want to make a radius of women suddenly horny. Naruto picked up the Kusanagi from the ground and spun it before putting it on his back. He looked around at the destruction that was caused from the 3 Sannin fighting, and their respectful apprentices assisting. He moved over to where a rock had been, and crouched down looking at the rubble. His wind style, Rasengan had utterly obliterated the rock. He had managed to hit Kabuto's arm with it, completely destroying it, but he hadn't been able to hit the snake's apprentice dead on with it. Still, Naruto felt good about the technique, even if he had missed. That didn't mean he wouldn't try to make it stronger, more destructive, with more blades in it as well. Why settle for less when you could have more? Naruto stood back up and glanced around once more. Jiraiya, Shizune, and Tsunade were all waiting for him back in town. Naruto had stayed behind to gather the sand he had used during the battle. His ability with it wasn't as perfected as Gaara's was, but he was quite capable and destructive with it. Still, it was time to get more. Naruto began at a quick jog. It would be a dead run for a civilian, but to him it was only a jog. He loved the feel of the wind whipping past his face, flowing through his hair. He ran up a wall and began to leap across the rooftops, heading towards the bar that they had first met Tsunade at. Naruto landed and quickly stepped in line with Jiraiya, who glanced over at the blonde. One of these days, Gaki, you need to tell me how you got all those abilities. I mean, you have the Sharingan, Rinnegan, control over sand like that Gaara Gaki, and the Hyoden like that fake hunter nin you met in Wave. What's next? The Mukten. Naruto gave a bit of a grin. Arrow Sennin, I already told you in a vague method that I got these abilities through a method that if I told you, I would lose it. As for what's next, who's to say? Tsunade moved to block Naruto off. Fine then, Gaki, as the Godime Hokage, I'm ordering you to tell me how you got these abilities. Naruto looked at Tsunade in the eyes, then shifted his eyes to look at Jiraiya. You asked her to order me to tell her, didn't you, Arrow Sennin? Guilty, but you still have to answer the question now. Gaki, wouldn't want to disobey your Hokage's orders, do you? Jiraiya asked. I swear by the log, if I lose the ability to gain more abilities, I am personally going to make a Hyoden-based Rasengan and shove it up your Arrow Sennin. Naruto said, glaring at the Sannin a bit. I'm still waiting, Naruto. Tsunade said, folding her arms under her impressive bust. Just tell her the same thing you tried with the Sandaime Hokage. Tell her you got the abilities from me. Kyuubi mentally told the blonde. Naruto looked to Tsunade's honey-colored eyes. The Kyuubi has been giving them to me. As I interact with people, I gain their abilities by feeling their chakra. Naruto then thought about it a second. Mostly, he added. The Rinnegan is a recessive gene within the Uzumaki clan. The Kyuubi just brought it forward for me to use. I've been around Mikoto Uchiha and Sasuke Uchiha, letting me get the Sharingan. Haku gave me the Hyoden because her chakra entered my system when she used the Ice Senbon on me and Sasuke. I beat Gaara's, so I got the sand, though I'm sort of iffy with it, as you've both seen. He lied his off, but it looked like Tsunade was buying it. That doesn't explain the Mangekyo Sharingan you got. Jiraiya mentioned, now folding his arms. Well, the Kyuubi was controlled by Madara Uchiha, who had the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, and she just held onto that feeling and gave it to me. Naruto lied. Tsunade nodded a bit, tapping her foot. So is it possible for you to get the Mukten by interacting with me, or my super strength technique? She asked. Naruto pondered that for a bit. Was it possible that if he had with Tsunade, both of those would have become perks? Naruto answered that one honestly. He gave a shrug. Hell if I know, won't know for a while. Now why would this method be inaccessible to you for telling us? Tsunade asked, still looking into the blonde's blue eyes. Part of her felt like he was lying, but at the same damn time, part of her was telling her he was telling the truth. Jiraiya was helping Naruto's position by not calling him out on lying. Naruto looked to Tsunade with a blank stare. I've been interacting with the Kyuubi, something most of Konoha would hate for me to do. They'll be demanding Jiraiya to use a tighter seal, and to seal away my abilities. Naruto glanced at Jiraiya. Not that he'd be able to, even if he chose to do it. I'd start using the Hiraishin and the Shadow clones to escape. As for the Kyuubi, she's also said that I was to try and keep this as close to the chest as possible. Ji-san found out before he died, Mikoto Uchiha found out, now you, Jiraiya, and Shizune know. At this point Naruto heard an oink. And taunton. He added for the pig's benefit. Tsunade nodded slightly, watching her fellow blonde. Her gut and instinct kept telling her that it wasn't a lie, but she still had a nagging feeling. If Jiraiya were to call him out, then she would as well, but since her fellow Sannin wasn't calling the blonde out, she couldn't really say anything. Too bad she didn't know that Jiraiya was feeling the exact same way. Now, can we please head inside? Naruto asked, motioning to the door. When Tsunade stepped away, Naruto moved past her to go inside. He took a seat and ordered some food, as well as their best sake, surprising the adults when he did so. Tsunade was quick to follow his lead. It was a time of celebration, and celebrations were made all the better with alcohol. You're paying for your Hokage, you have enough money, she said, pointing to Jiraiya, who looked like he was going to try to mooch off of Naruto. Naruto snickered a bit and elbowed Jiraiya in the ribs. I think that's an order, Ero Sennin, and I doubt you want to ignore it considering she could have a female Anbu posted at the hot springs, just waiting for you to start peeping. Jiraiya looked like he was going to refute, before he realized that it was well within Tsunade's powers as the Hokage to limit his peeping time. Fine, fine, Jiraiya said, hanging his head as he ordered their finest sake as well. When their food and sake came out, Naruto grabbed his bottle and held it up, once more surprising the two Sannin by the suddenness. To having a Godime Hokage by the name of Tsunade Senju who can take the title of first female Kage, to beating Orochimaru's even though he ran away, and to putting a dent in Ero Sennin's wallet. Naruto said. Tsunade laughed a bit and raised her own bottle. I'll drink to that, she said, tapping the bottom of the bottle against the bottom of Naruto's. Even Jiraiya, shaking his head, raised his bottle and tapped it against the bottom of their bottles. It was precisely then that the night began to go downhill. Tsunade began to get drunk, heavily drunk, because she challenged Naruto to a drinking contest to try and get her necklace back. Naruto took her up on the challenge, and began to match her bottle for bottle, getting drunk himself. Even though they had their respective ways to purge the alcohol, the sake they were drinking was hitting them hard. Jiraiya had started drinking more himself. He didn't need his own apprentice to show him up in yet another thing. But he didn't have the ability to purge the alcohol from his system like Tsunade and Naruto did, thus ending up a drunken mess. Shizune had drunk a bit, but being a lightweight got drunk pretty quickly. She had passed out on her fifth bottle while Naruto and Tsunade were in the upper teens. Naruto shrugged his shoulder a bit. Come on, Ero Sennin, stay off my shoulder, he told the Toad Sage. He had no idea how he was still pretty coherent, but Tsunade was faring about the same as well. He looked to Jiraiya, who was asleep, and sighed a bit. You can hold your liquor, Gaki, that's impressive, Tsunade said, with just a slight slur to her speech as she downed another bottle. Naruto glanced over to the buxom blonde and nodded a bit. Yeah, he said, and stood up, stretching. We better head back to the hotel rooms so Ero Sennin and Shizune can sleep in a bed. Naruto stumbled a bit as he moved to grab Jiraiya and shook his head. He then staggered his way over to the bar and paid for the bill, using Jiraiya's money, of course. It was rather staggering. Tsunade hefted Shizune up onto her back and carried her piggyback style. Come on, stud, Tsunade said sultrily, but still quite drunk. Grab the pervert and follow me. Naruto's head whipped over to the older woman before he quickly grabbed Jiraiya and hefted him up to follow Tsunade. Naruto was tempted to make a shadow clone to help, but he didn't want to mess up while he was drunk. Once outside in the cold air, he felt a little better. He staggered after Tsunade, who wasn't faring much better as she carried Shizune. The two made their way to Tsunade and Shizune's hotel, which was surprisingly close. Naruto went ahead and got another room for Jiraiya and himself, using Jiraiya's money of course. They dropped Shizune off, before Naruto dropped Jiraiya off in the room. Naruto grabbed his head, still surprisingly drunk with a remarkable ability of not wanting to sober up. Naruto then helped Tsunade drop Shizune off in the dark-haired woman's room. He noticed that Tsunade wasn't doing much better. They both leaned against the wall outside of Shizune's room, resting a little bit. Tsunade lolled her head to look to her left at her fellow blonde. "How's your stomach feeling, Naruto?" she asked. Naruto patted his stomach a bit before looking to the older woman. "Fine. I'm drunk, but I'm not going to throw up anytime soon, probably from years of eating ramen." "Good," Tsunade said and pushed off the wall, grabbing the blonde. She then smashed her lips into his own, pulling him with her as she headed to her room, sloppily making out with the blonde. Naruto kissed Tsunade back, his inhibitions lowered by the alcohol and his sense of danger dulled as he grabbed Tsunade's squeezing as he lifted her up. The door slammed shut and he felt the jacket get jerked down his shoulder, Tsunade's hands running over his back as he rubbed his tongue along Tsunade's, his hands squeezing and molesting her at the same time. Tsunade was briefly impressed with the blonde's physique. It had an undertone of muscle under the rather streamlined appearance, making Naruto rather deceptive in what his strength really could be. She moaned into the kiss, feeling her being grabbed as she was dropped onto the bed with Naruto still kissing her, their tongues gliding over one another. Naruto shuddered as he felt Tsunade's nails slide against his back a bit and he pulled away from the kiss. He removed her obi, before pulling open the top she wore, exposing her large beautiful in their full glory. He briefly wondered how she was able to keep them high and firm. His hands grabbed her, and started to squeeze them rather greedily. Despite her moan, Naruto saw Tsunade roll her eyes briefly and flash him a smirk. "You know, there is more to a woman than large," Tsunade said as she slipped the blonde's mesh shirt off, throwing it to the opposite wall. She pulled back at his slightly confused face and rolled over onto her hands and knees, showing off her round that was hugged by her black shinobi pants. She trailed her hand along the curve, and her smirk grew as she watched his eyes. Naruto paused when his eyes stopped following the hand that they were meant to. Tsunade was toying with him, and that wasn't going to fly. He slapped Tsunade on the, smirking at the look of shock on her face. He grabbed her pigtails then and pulled back on them, getting Tsunade's back to arch. "I'm not going to be so simple to get to stop," Naruto said as he began to pull the shinobi pants off of Tsunade's body. Tsunade took advantage of having her hair released and rolled back over, helping the blonde get her pants off. She then sat up, undoing Naruto's pants just as quickly as he had done to her own. She licked her lips at the sight of the heart and gave a smirk, knowing she was still enough to make men want her. She reached up and cupped his balls in her hand, rolling them between her strong, yet soft fingers. She then glanced up at Naruto's face and licked her lips a bit more. "Guess I should show you how good the legendary is, shouldn't I?" She had hated the damned nickname, and the perverts that it brought, but she liked to think that the seduction classes that the academy had when she was young had taught her quite a bit about pleasing a man, techniques she only sharpened over the years. She dropped her head down, and put the head into her mouth. Naruto let his head loll back as his back arched as Tsunade swirled her tongue around the head and flicked it across the tip of his. He moaned as her full lips began to slide down his shaft, slowly so that he could savor their feel, or so she could savor the taste of his. Her tongue trailed along the underside of his shaft as her fingers kept working his balls, and Naruto loved it. Tsunade paused and moved from the edge of the bed to kneel in front of the blonde. She rolled her eyes up to stare at him, not having taken her mouth off his. She estimated she was about halfway down on Naruto's. Her hands moved to her hips and she dropped her head all the way to the base, not once gagging as she kept her eyes locked with Naruto's cerulean eyes. Naruto's breath hitched as he felt Tsunade deep throat his without pause. He had to admit, he was rather impressed. He whimpered as she pulled back off of his, until he saw her smirk. She raised herself up from sitting on her heels and pressed her around his. He moaned as he felt the soft firm flesh rub against his shaft, her mouth taking the tip back in. Tsunade mentally smirked as she watched the pleasure on Naruto's face. The blonde was pleasantly endowed, and he should be proud of what he had, but he was still a guy, which meant a good pair of and a skilled mouth was more than enough to bend him over backwards with pleasure. Tsunade began to bob her head and her on and off Naruto's, working quickly but skillfully, getting the blonde to moan with more pleasure. Naruto gave a hiss of pleasure as he felt the soft mounds of Tsunade's moving against his shaft, and her tongue working over his while her lips also stroked him. Naruto clenched his hands tight, digging his nails into his palms to try and force the pleasure away to last longer for the woman kneeling in front of him. It felt wonderful, but he wouldn't succumb so easily. Tsunade rolled her eyes up to stare at the blonde and mentally smirked. It seemed he had some self-control, which was always a plus. Still, she refused to give up on making him blow his load like she wanted. She used one hand to hold her tight around Naruto's length as she reached up with her other hand and began to stroke his balls, using just the slightest hint of nail across his sensitive sack. Naruto shuddered and he arched his back in pleasure, his head leaning back. Close. So close. He warned Tsunade. He knew from experience he released a lot, he didn't want to give her that amount all at once without a bit of warning. He could practically feel the smugness radiating off of Tsunade, but he would get her back. Tsunade did feel rather smug. Her tongue stroked the ridge of Naruto's, teasing the sensitive flesh. She felt the surge and swelling as the first jet of the salty fluid spilled into her mouth. She felt Naruto's balls twitch against her hand as they kept pumping the fluid. Her cheeks bloated out, but she was determined to take it all in her mouth at once. She pulled off of Naruto's and looked up to the panting blonde. Naruto stared transfixed at Tsunade as she opened her mouth with his thick load still in her mouth. She rolled her tongue around in the fluid before she closed her mouth and her eyes. She seemed to savor it, savor the way it slid down her throat and into her stomach. A hand moved between Tsunade's legs, and Naruto watched her buck against her fingers. Tsunade opened her eyes and looked up to the blonde. She needed him buried inside of her. She stood up and sat on the bed before laying back and spreading her legs wide. Please, Naruto, I need it badly. She whispered, her hands rubbing and pinching her to try and give herself some pleasure. Naruto stepped forward and moved between Tsunade's shapely legs. He ran his hands up along Tsunade's toned and smooth thighs, looking her over. He pressed his between her lips, enjoying the feel of the wetness as he rubbed between them a bit with his. He moved his to rub against her to make her breathing hitch a bit. Naruto then pushed into the older blonde woman, moaning as he felt her tight grip his. Tsunade felt her breathing hitch and her back arched. Her eyes opened a little wider as she let out a low moan of pleasure as she felt her fellow blondes work inside of her. Due to her special seal-based genjutsu, her body was in the prime of its youth, meaning her was tight. Better yet, Naruto was thicker than most, and she got to enjoy every full sensation of the younger blonde steadily working deep into her body. Naruto looked down to Tsunade before he grabbed her hips. He felt her legs lock around his waist and her ankles lock behind him, no doubt understanding his intentions. Naruto looked to the honey-colored eyes of the Sannin, almost challengingly. He eased out before slamming in, getting a louder moan out of Tsunade before he began to withdraw once more. Tsunade accepted the challenger and she reached up with her hands and dug them into the genin's shoulders. He was thick, she arched her back a bit as she felt Naruto slam back into her, going at a steady pace of withdrawing slowly before slamming back in. Quote. She said as she rocked her hips into Naruto's. Naruto hissed slightly as he felt Tsunade rake her hands down over his chest and he felt some blood spill down against his chest. That had hurt like a bitch. He rolled his hips forward, thrusting in and out of Tsunade with more vigor and speed now. He'd get her back. His hands slid from her hips to her stomach and moved up to her, grabbing them tightly and thrusting even harder, grunting with each inward thrust. Tsunade gave her own grunt of pleasure as the blonde squeezed her. Damn, she whispered, trying to keep up with the insane pace of the blonde. She had worked for years on building stamina due to a war, and she would prove it. She moved her hands to the blonde's neck and pulled him down, kissing him deeply, her tongue meeting his. Naruto swirled his tongue around Tsunade's as he thrust in and out of her faster. His fingers moved to Tsunade's and he pinched and twisted them, teasing her and getting whimpers from the busty blonde woman. Still, Naruto began to go faster. He pulled from the kiss and leaned in, biting Tsunade's and tugging with his teeth. Tsunade gave a louder moan and she tried to press Naruto into her bosom even more as she felt the blonde hammer into her. She could barely take it, but she wouldn't come first. She wouldn't have a lower amount of stamina when compared to the blonde Gaki pounding her. She rolled them over so Naruto was on his back and she was on top. She leaned back and bounced up and down faster, her pigtails bouncing a bit as she dug her nails into Naruto's chest. Naruto was surprised at the change of pace and position and he thrust up into Tsunade, grunting a bit as he thrust when she came down, driving himself just a touch further into her and with just a bit more power. It really got Tsunade going as she got a bit louder with her moans. Naruto reached up and slapped the blonde on her and smirked at the sight of shock and pleasure on her fact, no doubt not many people having the balls to do that to her. Tsunade grabbed Naruto's hands and moved them from her, to keep the boy from spanking her again, and moved them to her chest, squeezing her hands around his own and moaning as both their fingers dug into her. "Oh Kami," she muttered as she stayed down and just ground her hips into the boy's, whimpering a bit as she made that thick brush her G-spot. It was just what she needed. Naruto felt a stirring in his balls and knew he was getting closer to his orgasm. He pulled from Tsunade and shifted their bodies. Tsunade landed on her hands and knees and Naruto was standing behind her. He grabbed her pigtails in one hand and her hip in the other before pushing inside her, giving a low groan as he felt her tight squeezing him once more. He pulled on Tsunade's hair making her back arch. Tsunade whimpered a bit more as the blonde brushed her G-spot over and over in the new position that let him in a little deeper. It was what she needed, but the way he grabbed her hair and made her back arch was driving her nuts. She knew her scraping across the sheets would add to her pleasure, but with Naruto pulling on her hair, she just couldn't get them to do so. Quote! She cried out, grabbing at her own. Naruto panted and felt a drop of sweat roll down from his brow and into his eye a bit. He reached up, releasing Tsunade's hip to do so, and wiped it away before he smacked Tsunade's large in front of him. He was standing off the bed for this position and soon he put his foot up on the bed, giving him a higher angle to push down into Tsunade from, getting her to moan louder. Tsunade couldn't take it anymore. "Coming. I'm coming," she cried out and her inner muscles tightened up as her orgasm rolled through her like a maelstrom. Her eyes rolled into the back of her head and her juices spilled over both their thighs as Tsunade had the strongest orgasm she had in over 15 years. Nothing quite felt right like a hung man, and the blonde pounding her just proved it. Naruto felt Tsunade's inner walls pulsing around him, squeezing and clamping down on his and it had been too much. His back arched and he let out a groan of pleasure as he flooded Tsunade's, his hips bucked as he tried to drive his cum inside of her as deep as possible. As he fired the last jet of cum inside her, Naruto laid down on Tsunade's back and held her. Tsunade rolled them over onto their sides, panting a bit and leaning against her fellow blonde. That was some hard, and she had no problem admitting that the blonde had better stamina than she did, especially given that she had been so damned well to be proven that fact. But her exhaustion and drunken state finally caught up to her, and to the blonde behind her, as she closed her eyes. Naruto's steady heartbeat lulled her to sleep. Naruto woke up the next morning, and alone and his head was pounding. Oh damn, he whispered, clutching his head and rubbing his temples. For a second, he couldn't remember what happened. Had he and Shizune had? He glanced around and saw the clothes and realized he and Shizune did not have. The events of the night before came rushing back just as Tsunade walked out, wrapped in a towel from having a shower. Do you, this was frustrating. Don't tell me you forgot about last night, Gaki, you were a beast last night. Tsunade said with a bit of a smirk at Naruto's lack of concentration or embarrassment. Oh hell no, I did not forget. In fact, it's branded in my memory. Naruto said and stood up, wrapping the sheet around his lower half. But I don't want to get hurt because of my drunken state. Tsunade gave a bit of a chuckle. It wasn't intentional, but I did have fun myself. But let me make one thing absolutely clear. You tell anyone about what happened last night, and I will personally castrate you with a plastic spork. She said, looking to the blonde with a touch of killing intent. Naruto snapped into a crisp salute. Yes ma'am, he said in a firm voice that showed he got the message loud and clear. She was a medic nin, he could believe she would castrate him with a plastic eating utensil. Now go shower. I left some pills on the sink to take and help with the headache. Tsunade said as she grabbed some fresh clothes from her luggage and put them on. Naruto headed to the bathroom and hopped in the shower, closing his eyes as he scrubbed himself down. Kyuubi. Naruto mentally called out to his tenant, hoping she could speed up the recovery process of the hangover. Not so loud, Gaki. Damn, did you have to drink so much last night? Kyuubi came back with mentally. Naruto winced a bit. Did you get drunk last night as well? He asked. Yes, I was originally not going to purge the alcohol, teach you a lesson and all. But I got as drunk as you and that buxom woman did last night. This might be a bad thing. Drink a lot of water, I need it. Kyuubi said. Naruto moved under the water and opened his mouth, drinking from the shower head and drinking as much of the water as he could. 2 questions. First, why might being drunk last night be a bad thing? And 2, why do I need to drink a lot of water? I can accelerate your body's process of breaking down the alcohol or purging it from your system with additional water. By the time your shower is over, you should be feeling infinitely better. As for your other question, did you notice the diamond-like seal on Tsunade's forehead? That's an Uzumaki seal, Kyuubi explained as Naruto drank more water. I think. No, I know I sent my chakra through you, into Tsunade, and more importantly to that seal that is fundamental to her ultimate healing technique. My chakra has reversed her age anywhere from 1 year to 30 years. I might have also given her the Mukten. Naruto paused and digested that little nugget of information. In private, he would have to tell Tsunade and soon. Damn, he said out loud. He got out of the shower. Sure, he got as much as humanly possible of the smell of alcohol and from his person. He got out of the shower and quickly dried himself off. He popped the 2 pills to handle his headache and headed out, finding Tsunade had gotten him a fresh set of clothes. He quickly pulled them on and left via the window. He booked it across town to his and Jiraiya's other hotel room and he quickly went in, grabbing his back and slinging it onto his shoulder. He scanned for anything he or Jiraiya might have left, but seeing nothing he also grabbed Jiraiya's pack and took it with him. Naruto walked across the rooftops, debating on what he should do. Tsunade was awake, obviously, but he didn't know if Jiraiya and Shizune were. Damn, he said again. He pulled out his book and flipped it open. Congratulations. You had with Tsunade Senju, Godime Hokage. Plus 1,600 points plus 20 politics, plus 10 poison making, plus 10 medicine making, plus 15 medical jutsu. Perks added. Naruto tapped the points into the bar. Congratulations. You received the bronze, Strong woman, medal. Plus 500 points. Naruto again tapped the points in. Flipping through the pages, he quickly found the medals and tapped on the strong woman. Strong woman. Bronze. Have with 1S ranked kunoichi. Simple enough. Naruto then flipped over to the list of the women and found Tsunade. There were two, one was blocked off. He tapped it. Tsunade of the Sannin. Requirements. Have with Tsunade Senju before she takes the title of Godime Hokage. Status. Locked. Naruto glanced around at the few others, noticing a few that had 2 spots instead of 1. He'd figure everything out. He headed to the perks page, looking through them for the new ones. Super Strength. Requirements. Have with Tsunade Senju, Strength 50, Chakra Control 50, Chakra Levels 50. So long as your chakra control is equal or better than your chakra levels, you can use Tsunade's famed Super Strength technique. Naruto had 3 perk points, so he went ahead and got that, a scroll popping out that he tucked away. Mukten. Requirements. Have with Tsunade Senju, Chakra Control 50, Chakra Level 60, Earth Elemental Composition 75, Water Elemental Composition 75. You can use the power of the Shodai Hokage and use the Mukten to grow trees with your chakra. This can contain a Biju or a Jinchuriki using their Biju's chakra and calm them down. Naruto had his finger hovering over it. Kyuubi would be upset if he took it, more so if he ever used it on her. Hell, he already had the chakra chains and the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. He went ahead and accepted it, he'd make it up to the Kyuubi in time. Naruto tucked that scroll away as well and then put the book away. He then ran to find Tsunade, hoping he could get to her before Shizune and Jiraiya woke up to leave. Naruto landed on the ice in a crouch hand on the ice and his legs spread a little bit. Dodo! He shouted, gaining the attention of both Koyuki and Dodo Kazuhana. Koyuki looked hopeful but Dodo seemed pissed, wearing that black chakra armor of his. Impudent child, Dodo said, already upset about the fact that the treasure of snow was actually a heating generator made by his foolish brother. His hands went through the 5 required hand seals. Hyoten! Kokuryu Bofusetsu! He shouted, summoning the ice and snow around them to form a dragon of black snow. Naruto charged up a Rasengan in his right hand and charged forward. He dodged the dragon, and kept running on the ice, having eyes only for Dodo. Naruto's Rasengan barreled into the man and was getting progressively smaller. Naruto noticed a crack appear on the armor before Dodo raised both hands over his head and drove Naruto through the ice by slamming his fists down like a hammer. Naruto's head was busted open and mixed with the icy water. The only reason he wasn't knocked out was because of the water, and he was sure he had a concussion on top of various other injuries he had. Naruto got out of the water a ways off, and shook his head a bit, water and blood flinging a bit. His vision blurred a little, and he saw 4 of Dodo for a moment before it all came back into focus. Naruto hated using this technique. In the month it had been since he got back from finding Tsunade, this was officially his most hated technique. 2 clones popped up beside Naruto and began to manipulate the chakra around the Rasengan. It was dangerous to use, and the only reason he was even thinking about using it was because Dodo had to be stopped, and if an A-rank technique didn't cut through that armor of his, an S rank would. Naruto and his clones rushed ahead as Dodo finished 6 seals this time. Hyoten! Soryu Bofusetsu! Dodo cried out, this time 2 of those black dragons forming from the ice and snow nearby, twisting together almost into a twister. Naruto's clones rushed ahead, the original had the Rasengan variant completely stabilized. No doubt it would be listed as a kinjutsu as well if Tsunade knew what it could do. The first of Naruto's clones jumped into the twister head on and exploded, forcing the jutsu to destabilize. The second clone rushed at Dodo and ducked under the swing, dashing past the man and grabbing Koyuki, leaping up onto one of the large glacial-like pillars. Dodo was all the original Naruto's and they didn't want Koyuki to get in the middle of the technique. Naruto dashed across the water, stepping on the broken ice as it melted because of the heating generator. Hyoten. Rasen Hai Hana. Naruto drove his Rasengan variant into Dodo's chest and the armor cracked even more before failing, ice being formed on Dodo's chest and on Naruto's hand. The ball began to slow in its spinning and Naruto disengaged his hand from the jutsu and kicked himself off of Dodo, leaping away. In midair, the effects happened. Had a Byakugan or Sharingan user seen what happened, they would see Naruto's chakra spinning around in the air around Dodo, and when the ball exploded with chakra and ice, the absolute freezing abilities of it traveled along the spiraling chakra in the air, causing it to freeze the air and moisture around it into a spiral shape that was almost 20 feet across and at least 10 into the air. Koyuki could only stare in amazement. Her uncle, the source of her life being a hell, was trapped in that ice prison, and from her position so high in the air, she could see and understand the name. It looked like a spiraled blossom of ice. The clone she was with hopped down and took her over to Naruto, who had his hand hidden, something she noticed but didn't ask about it. "Good job, Naruto," Kakashi said as he arrived on the scene and then noted the blonde holding his hand to hide it. "What happened?" Naruto sighed and showed his hand, the fingertips blackened with severe frostbite. Had it been anyone else, they would have lost their fingertips. Instead, Kakashi could see the effects of the Kyuubi's chakra already as the skin was forced to heal at an accelerated rate. "My latest technique, it causes near instantaneous freezing." Naruto shook his head a bit before he realized that was a mistake. "I also apparently have a concussion," he said before his body went limp and he slumped forward, caught by Kakashi. Kakashi shook his head slightly. He knew Naruto wouldn't die from a concussion, certainly not with the Kyuubi inside of him. He hefted the blonde up to carry him properly. "Well, shall we go?" Kakashi asked Koyuki, who offered a nod. Inside Naruto's mind, he was sitting in front of the cage before the Kyuubi, going over a visual representation of all of his skills up to date. Many of them were lethal already, and with Kakashi knowing about his Hyoten variant Rasengan, Tsunade was no doubt going to ban him from using it. "I need a way to throw the damn thing," he said loudly and suddenly. Kyuubi shook her head and crossed her arms up under her bust. She had been watching the blonde closer for some time now. She wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to take advantage of his newfound abilities, much like a certain super pervert would. Instead, the blonde was indeed having a vast amount of, but he was never forcing his influence on a woman. They went to him willingly. It was almost laughable how, despite everything, he had moments like this where he was so childish. But he brought up a good point. He did need to throw both his Hyoten and Futon Rasengan variants. The damage was too great to his body to continue using them up close and personal. If they could purify her chakra, in a sense at least, then it would be more akin to regenerating the damaged cells instead of forcing them to divide and repair, thus shaving off days of his life per injury per attack. She estimated he would still live several years past 100, being an Uzumaki and having her inside of him. Kyuubi sighed as she closed her eyes and ignored the blonde spouting random ideas, only to shoot them down himself. She turned and walked around her cage a little bit, trying to make sure everything went well with healing the concussion. Why did the blonde have to shake his head? Kyuubi withdrew away from the blonde to work on the concussion, keeping her eyes closed as it required a bit of concentration. She paused as she connected to the blonde's senses. She could smell the scent of that actress, Koyuki, and the woman was highly aroused. Good at hiding it, if Kyuubi's smell was right, but highly aroused. Koyuki leaned down and kissed the blonde on the cheek, just as a picture flashed. She smiled a bit, and heard how it would make a good souvenir from her director, and it would make for good blackmail material. He and the photographer headed out of the room, leaving Koyuki alone with the blonde. She slumped into a chair and sighed heavily before looking to the concussed blonde. She shook her head a bit, a slight smile on her face as she thought about all that he did. She scooted a little closer and gently brushed his blonde hair away from his bandaged face. A kiss and a picture isn't a proper thank you. She whispered, even if the blonde wouldn't hear her. Then there were the improper thoughts she had been having since she was rescued 2 days ago. Her dreams were filled with such erotic thoughts. She thought she perhaps needed a bit of thrill to her life, so she signed up to be the main leading female for the Ika Ika movie coming out. But not 5 feet away from the blonde, she could feel her thoughts turn even more improper. She bit her lip, hoping for a distraction, but none came. She reached under the hospital blanket and ran her hand under the pants the blonde wore. Koyuki licked her lips as she felt the boy's impressive girth and length. Definitely not a boy here, she whispered in a huskier tone. Naruto felt himself waken, and the blanket had shifted that was over him. Kyubi had told him to enjoy something, and he had glanced at her for a moment when he didn't know what she was talking about. He woke up to having Koyuki's hand in his pants, and he could hear her breathing getting shallower. His concussion was also non-existent. Whether Kyubi accelerated the healing or just made it so he couldn't feel it, he had no idea. Koyuki moved the blanket out of the way just enough for her to see what she was playing with. Her breathing got heavier as she saw it was in fact all real. Her left hand began to pump him up and down while her right slid into her kimono, under the bra and teasing her with her palm. She drew her hand back a moment, seeing his hanging out and proud, wet with a bit of smeared-in pre-cum. She needed something to lubricate with. She bit her lip and began to search the cabinets for something, and soon she found something. She doubted it was the original purpose of the gel, but it was a medical lubricant. She smeared some of the gel on her hands and rubbed them together, warming up the gel. If the gel was cold, then the blonde might wake up, and that was something she didn't want to happen. She went back and sat down and used the gel on her hand to start pumping Naruto's. Naruto bit the tip of his tongue, trying to stay quiet. Kami, it was incredible feeling the princess's hand work up and down on his. He just barely opened one eye, and noticed she was working her hand at her in the kimono while she pumped him. Who would have thought the princess, excuse him daimyo, would be getting off on something like this? Naruto let out a soft sound, feeling his shaft thicken and his balls tighten. Her hand worked over him even faster, the lube making the sensation phenomenal. He thanked his lucky stars because he seriously doubted he would experience such pleasure any other way except for being thrown into this game. Koyuki felt the in her hand begin to thicken and pulse. She licked her lip and tightened her grip and slowed her hand, pumping firmer. She could practically feel the orgasm coming up. She looked to the sleeping blonde, not even noticing his eyes were partially opened, enough for a trained shinobi to see. That's it, Naruto-kun, come for me, she whispered in a huskier tone. She saw his balls twitch as her hand neared the base and she felt the surge go through his length. She watched as the hot seed shot from the tip, getting a bit of air before coming down over her hand. The other surges weren't as powerful, but they did run down all over her hand and Naruto's. Koyuki looked at the white liquid and leaned her head down. She lapped at it with a moist and pink tongue, her eyes savoring the taste as she swept it off the head of his. She removed her hand from the base of the thick and rubbed her face against the shaft, enjoying the feel of the cum getting smeared against her face. You know, Koyuki, you could have just asked first, Naruto said and opened both eyes and sat up to look at Koyuki, who was wide-eyed. I wouldn't have complained, I would have been flattered and let you do what you'd like. How long have you been awake for? Koyuki asked slightly accusingly. Naruto gave a slight grin. Long enough, he said somewhat cryptically. Besides, I thought you'd be happy. Now we can do a whole lot more. Koyuki's eyes widened for a moment before she arched one eyebrow. And what makes you think I want to do more? She asked. Naruto wasn't quite sure himself, but he tapped his nose. The nose, he said simply. It was like he could smell Koyuki's arousal. Koyuki looked down to the length of arousal in her hand still. She could feel his cum drying against her cheek, and she sighed softly. She engulfed the tip in her mouth, moaning at the taste of the cum and sliding her head down further. Naruto let out a loud moan of pleasure as he let Koyuki work her mouth up and down over about half his length while her hand kept pumping at his. He watched her thighs shift, no doubt trying to bring herself some amount of pleasure that she was withholding from herself by not stripping and straddling him. Naruto had no problem going at her pace, however. Koyuki closed her eyes as she imagined that she was on inside of her. Her tongue flicked over each thick part of it, making her moan even more. She rubbed her tongue down one of the veins, and she felt the blonde shudder. She slid her hand lower and cupped the balls that Naruto had to go with his. Koyuki pulled back and swirled her tongue around the crown of his as she fondled his balls at the same time. It was so big and thick. The blonde was also lasting plenty of time. No doubt she would orgasm before he did. She went back to pumping her hand up and down. Naruto reached down and ran his hand through Koyuki's hair. Who would have thought that a daimyo would be him off? Then again, he has had a cage him off too. He wondered if he should start keeping it in his pants a little more. Naruto let out a loud moan of pleasure as he felt Koyuki go all the way down to where her fist was, taking the tip into her throat for a moment. Naruto felt her throat spasm and she made a few soft sounds. The blonde gripped the bed and grit his teeth, forcing himself not to buck his hips upwards. It was a struggle, but soon Koyuki drew back enough that the sensation passed. Koyuki gave a slight smirk as she felt a small sense of power rush through her. The blonde was quite responsive to her touch and she was barely doing anything. She was going to enjoy this, thoroughly. She pressed her tongue against the bottom of the blonde's and slowly dragged her tongue up along it to the crown where she circled her tongue around the flesh. She slowly began to bob her head on and off her cheeks hollowing as she on the rod. Koyuki then slowly moved off her saviors and then moved to kneel between his legs. She put her hands on his thighs and lowered her head to the thick. She licked her lips, slowly, watching Naruto's eyes as she slowly began to sink her head down onto the. It was going to be a struggle, one she desperately wanted to fight. Naruto watched as Koyuki began to deep-throat him, slowly pushing her head further down along the shaft. Naruto forced a spasm down as he felt Koyuki's throat gag around him as she forced herself to take him deeper. But her eyes never left his eyes, making it that much more impressive, even as they began to water. Koyuki touched the base of his with her lips, her chin touching his full balls. She could feel the slight twitches and trembles in the. She slowly drew back, coughing a bit as her airway was flooded with air. Kami. It had felt wonderful to do that. She continued to, even though she felt a sense of pride swelling in her chest. Something else was swelling inside of her though. Naruto's gave a twitch and the blonde gave a loud moan of pleasure. Koyuki's eyes widened as she felt the first shot of cum in her mouth and throat. She began the uphill struggle of swallowing all of the cum that was flooding out. She didn't want to miss a single drop, she wanted all of it. Naruto panted a bit as he came down from his orgasm. He watched as Koyuki slowly pulled off of his, slurping at it the entire way. She pulled off the tip with a small pop sound and Naruto watched her. Koyuki looked at the still hard blonde and stroked it softly. She soon sat higher on her knees and quickly untied the kimono she wore and tossed it to the side. Her bra went next and she moved to straddle the blonde. She was pleasantly surprised when he sat up and grabbed at her and began to on her. She wasn't much more than a handful, but the blonde didn't care and it made her back arch and she moaned in pleasure. Naruto didn't mind that she wasn't as busty as some of the other women he